What would you do if you drove 2 hours to an estate reading, and your father, a man worth $300 million, left you a broken pocket watch? Not a metaphor, not a clue wrapped in sentiment, an actual watch, cracked crystal, rusted winding crown, hands frozen permanently at 4:17, handed to you in a room full of people who were quietly dividing a private jet and 8 boutique hotels among themselves. That is exactly what happened to Fiona Aldridge, 41 years old, 4th grade teacher at Riverside Elementary in Dayton, Ohio. And if you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Not even close. The offices of Kettner, Hale & Price occupied the 17th floor of a glass tower in downtown Columbus. The kind of building where the lobby smells like recirculated wealth. Fiona had driven up from Dayton that morning through a grey November drizzle, still wearing the cardigan she'd had on for parent-teacher conferences the day before. She hadn't slept. She'd been crying on and off since Tuesday, when Harrison Price's office had called to confirm the time. Victor Aldridge had died 11 days earlier. Pulmonary failure, the official report said. He was 74. Most people who knew the name Victor Aldridge knew him as the founder of Aldridge Precision Components, a manufacturing company that made specialized parts for aerospace and medical device industries. The business press called him methodical, private, relentless. His employees, more than 2,000 of them across 3 plants in Ohio and Indiana, called him fair. Fiona had grown up calling him Dad, until she stopped calling him much of anything at all. Her mother, Victor's first wife, Carol, had died of a stroke when Fiona was 26. By the time the funeral arrangements were finalized, a woman named Claudette Marsh had already been in Victor's life for 2 years. Claudette was polished, strategic, and very good at making people feel like they were standing just outside a door she controlled. Within 14 months of Carol's death, she was Claudette Aldridge. Within 2 years, her adult son from a prior marriage, Owen Marsh, 34, who carried himself with the confident laziness of someone who had never once been told no, was being introduced at company functions as Victor's stepson. Fiona didn't fight it. She watched it happen with the quiet, helpless grief of someone who can see exactly what is occurring, but has no mechanism to stop it. She asked her father once, directly, if he was sure about Claudette. He told her she was being protective, and that he loved that about her. That was the last real conversation they had. For 9 years after that, they existed in the same family the way 2 photographs can share a frame without touching. She had not come to the reading expecting anything. She had come because he was her father, and she owed him her presence, even now. The conference room was long and narrow, with a view of the Columbus skyline streaked grey with rain. Claudette was already seated when Fiona arrived, wearing a black wrap dress that fit like it had been sewn directly onto her. She looked up when Fiona entered and smiled the way people smile when they have already won. Owen sat beside her, scrolling through something on his phone. He glanced up, gave Fiona a single nod, and went back to his screen. Fiona sat at the far end of the table, set her tote bag on the floor, and folded her hands. Harrison Price, white-haired, 71, with the deliberate stillness of someone who had spent 4 decades managing other people's crises, opened a leather folder and cleared his throat. We are here for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Victor Raymond Aldridge. Mr. Aldridge's instructions were specific. We proceed without interruption. What followed was the dismantling of a life's work, asset by asset. To Claudette, the family home on Olentangy River Road, the villa in Sedona, and a controlling 55% stake in Aldridge Precision Components. Her composure didn't flicker. She had clearly already known. To Owen, the commercial real estate portfolio across Columbus and Cincinnati, a cash trust worth $18 million, and the private airplane, a Cessna Citation he used primarily to fly to golf tournaments in Florida. There were charitable bequests, provisions for pension continuity. Harrison read through them carefully, methodically. Fiona sat still. She watched the rain move across the window. "And to my daughter," Harrison said, and the room went very quiet. Fiona Aldridge, for the strength she has shown in building her own life, and for the integrity she has maintained in the face of distance neither of us adequately addressed. I leave the Aldridge family pocket watch, which belonged to my own father, Ernest Aldridge. I ask her to keep it. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Owen made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, a short exhalation through his nose, the kind people produce when they're trying to look like they're not enjoying something. Claudette made no sound at all. She simply reached across the table and laid her hand lightly over Owen's wrist, the gesture of someone communicating patience. Harrison reached into his briefcase, withdrew a small velvet pouch, and slid it down the length of the table. Fiona caught it. Inside was a pocket watch, brass-cased, maybe the size of a silver dollar, cracked crystal face, a winding crown rusted in place, hands frozen at 4:17. The monogram on the back, EA, scratched and barely legible, had been worn down by decades of handling. That concludes the formal reading, Harrison said. Fiona stared at the watch. The room felt very small. Well, Claudette said, adjusting the collar of her dress, her voice arranged into something that sounded like sympathy but wasn't. He always said you were independent. I suppose this is his way of honoring that. A small pause, precisely calibrated. The school district in Dayton does offer good benefits, doesn't it? I imagine the retirement plan is decent. Fiona did not look up. She set the watch down carefully on the table. Then she picked it back up, closed her fingers around it, and stood. Her chair scraped the floor. She gathered her tote bag, nodded once at Harrison, and walked out. She made it to the stairwell before her legs gave out. She sat on the cold concrete landing between the 16th and 17th floors, her back against the cinder block wall, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes. A broken watch. She had taken 2 personal days, driven 2 hours, and sat in that room while a legal document read aloud the inventory of everything she wasn't. 9 years of silence, and this was what it totaled. The stairwell door opened. Harrison Price stood in the doorway, briefcase in one hand, overcoat folded over his arm. He looked down at her without surprise, as though he had expected to find her precisely here. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, "I need you to come with me." "The reading is over, Mr. Price. You said so yourself." I said the formal reading was concluded. He glanced up toward the door above them. "What follows was not for the room. Your father was very explicit about that." She looked at him. Something in his face, not warmth exactly, but a controlled urgency sitting underneath his usual composure, made her get to her feet. They did not take the elevator. Harrison led her through a service exit, down through the building's underground parking garage, to a dark blue Ford sedan idling near the back wall. He opened the passenger door. "Your father knew that Claudette had access to the original will filing," he said, once they were moving. "He knew she had developed relationships with 2 junior associates at our firm. He also knew that if he left you any direct monetary bequest in the primary document, Claudette's attorneys would tie it up in contested probate for years. You would have spent everything fighting them and walked away with nothing." Fiona pressed the watch against her palm. The cracked crystal edge was sharp against her skin. "So he left me a broken watch. He left you a key. He needed to know you were the kind of person who would still be holding it when I found you." Harrison kept his eyes on the road. "He told me, if she throws it across the room, she's not ready. If she walks out with it in her hand, find her." She was quiet for a moment. I-71 opened up ahead of them, heading north through the gray Ohio afternoon. "Find me for what?" Harrison reached into his overcoat and withdrew a white envelope, sealed with red wax pressed with a double S signet Fiona recognized from her father's private correspondence, a seal she had seen her entire childhood. "Open it when we arrive," he said. "We're going to Akron." They drove without speaking for nearly an hour. Fiona held the envelope in her lap and watched the state move past, bare fields, grain silos, county roads cutting through scrub. The rain softened to mist. They exited the interstate and worked through the industrial edges of Akron, past self-storage facilities and shuttered diners, until Harrison turned onto a gravel access road marked with a weathered sign. Private, no trespassing, Ironget Holdings, LLC. The road ran half a mile before ending at a chain-link gate topped with razor wire. Behind it stood what had once been a grain elevator complex, 6 concrete silos rising 60 feet into the fog, flanked by a low industrial building with new windows and no visible signage. Harrison held a keycard against a panel beside the gate. It rolled back silently on fresh hardware. "Your father purchased this property 17 years ago," he said, "under the name Ironget Holdings. Claudette never knew it existed." Inside the perimeter, a steel door with a biometric reader admitted them into a space that was nothing like the exterior suggested. A clean, climate-controlled office, workstations, a conference table, a wall of dark monitors. A corridor behind it led toward the base of the silos. At its end, a heavy steel door opened to a staircase going down. At the base of the stairs was a room the size of a large classroom. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, the low hum of a dehumidifier. Fireproof filing cabinets lined one wall in the center, a single workstation, and a small USB reader. The watch, Fiona. She had been running her thumb across the back of it for the entire drive, across the worn EA monogram, and somewhere on the highway she had felt it. A slight give along one edge. She pressed her thumbnail against it now firmly. The brass backing did not flip. It slid, the entire rear panel moving sideways on a hidden track, a fraction of an inch at a time, until a small recessed compartment appeared inside the case. Nestled in a groove cut into the brass was a USB drive no larger than her thumbnail. Her hands were not steady. She got it in on the second try. The monitor came to life. A password prompt appeared, then dissolved. The drive contained its own authentication. A loading screen filled the room with blue light. Then a video file, labeled only with today's date, began to play. Victor Aldridge appeared on the screen. He looked diminished in the way illness diminishes people, thinner than she remembered, his neck loose inside the collar of a flannel shirt she recognized from years ago. But his eyes were still her father's eyes, dark brown, direct, carrying that slight impatience that had always made her feel like she needed to get to the point, stop wasting his time. She had resented that quality in him once. Looking at it now through a monitor in a concrete room in Akron, she found it unbearable to love. "Hi, Fiona." His voice was rough at the edges. He cleared his throat. "If you're watching this, you didn't throw the watch. That means you're braver than you probably feel right now, and I need you to hear that before I say anything else." She pressed her knuckles against her mouth. "2 years after I married Claudette, I started having episodes," he continued. "Confusion, memory gaps, fatigue that didn't respond to anything my doctor prescribed. My cardiologist thought vascular. My neurologist thought early-stage dementia. I accepted it. I didn't want to believe anything else." He looked down at his hands briefly. "Harrison hired an independent physician 18 months ago, out of state. No connection to anyone in my life. She found what my own doctors had missed because they weren't looking for it. Consistent over-medication with a blood thinner, calibrated to produce symptoms without triggering acute crisis. Not enough to kill me quickly, enough to keep me confused and legally pliable." The room felt very cold. Claudette had access to my prescription bottles. Owen was managing my pharmacy refills. I don't know exactly when it started. I know it was deliberate. His jaw tightened. "I also know that over the past 3 years, Owen has been skimming from the manufacturing division's operational accounts, structured to avoid audit flags. Harrison has the forensic accounting. The total is a little over $4 million. Fiona had stopped breathing. "I couldn't go to the police without destroying the company in the process. The stock, the pensions, the workers who have been with me for 20 years. I was not willing to do that." Then, the ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but close. "So I did something else." He leaned slightly forward. Claudette thinks she inherited the company. She inherited the public company, and the debt I spent 2 years quietly attaching to it. Irongate Holdings is the primary lender on 4 of the 5 boutique hotel properties she personally guaranteed under the Aldridge family trust. She leveraged them herself 3 years ago to buy into the luxury hospitality market. She thought she was building her own empire inside mine. He paused. She was building a cage. He held her gaze through the screen. The USB drive contains 3 folders. The first is the forensic accounting on Owen's embezzlement. The second is the physician's report and pharmacy records. Both have already been shared with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and the Ohio Attorney General. The third contains the full legal documentation transferring Irongate Holdings, every asset, every receivable, to you as of last Monday morning. He stopped, and in the silence, something in his face changed. The businessman's precision gave way to something older, more tired, and entirely unguarded. I pushed you away after your mother died. I told myself I was giving you space. I told myself that Claudette would settle into something manageable, and that you and I would find our way back eventually. He pressed his lips together. I was afraid and I was grieving, and I let the wrong person fill the silences because it was easier than sitting in it alone. That is the truth. And I don't have the time left that I would need to make it right the way it deserves to be made right. His voice dropped to barely above a murmur. I love you, Fiona. I have loved you every single day. I just spent too many of those days convincing myself that showing up later would be enough. I'm sorry it wasn't. The screen went still, then black. Fiona sat in the concrete room for a long time. Harrison stood near the filing cabinets with his hands clasped and let her have the silence. Outside, somewhere above the ceiling, wind moved through the silos and made a sound like a held breath finally released. When she looked up, her face was dry. Her voice, when it came, was even. The hotels, she said. When does Claudette's first loan payment come due? Past due by 6 weeks, Harrison said. All 4 properties are in technical default. We can accelerate foreclosure immediately, or we can hold and allow the default to become public. He paused. Your call. And the FBI. The referral was made last Thursday. The Financial Crimes Unit has opened a formal investigation. The AG's office is reviewing the medical records for potential criminal charges. Fiona nodded slowly. She turned the pocket watch over in her hand, feeling the warmth the brass had taken from her grip over the last 2 hours. Let it play out, she said. I want her to understand exactly what's happening while it's happening. 8 weeks later, the atmosphere inside the executive conference room at Aldridge Precision's Columbus headquarters was nothing like the composed scene at Kettner, Hale and Price. Claudette stood at the window with a phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight and controlled in the way that voices get when panic is being managed from the inside. 2 attorneys sat at the conference table. Between them lay a row of bank communications that had arrived that morning, formal notices of default acceleration on 4 separate loan instruments, all bearing the Irongate Holdings letterhead. Owen paced the length of the room like something that knew it was cornered. Get me whoever runs Irongate, Claudette was saying into the phone. I want a name. I want a number. I want a human being. That's going to be complicated, said a voice from the doorway. Claudette turned. Fiona Aldridge stood in the frame of the conference room door. She wore a charcoal blazer she'd ordered 2 weeks earlier. Nothing extravagant, just something that fit, and her posture was entirely still. The way things are still when they have nothing left to prove. Harrison stood half a step behind her with a leather portfolio. The color left Claudette's face in a visible wave. Fiona, she said the name the way you say something you've found in your house that shouldn't be there. What are you? How did you get past security? Building security reports to the building owner, Fiona said, walking to the table. As of last week, that's me. She set her bag down and pulled out a chair. You can hang up, Claudette. I'm the human being you wanted. Owen took a step toward the door. One of the two private security contractors who had followed Fiona in moved quietly to occupy the frame. Harrison opened his portfolio and slid a document package down the table. "Elongate Holdings LLC, sole principal Fiona Carol Aldridge," he said, "primary lender on the Aldridge Family Trust Hotel portfolio. The Hayden in Cincinnati, both Columbus properties, and the Bexley Terrace. All four are in formal default, subject to accelerated foreclosure under Section 12 of each loan agreement." Claudette's attorney began to speak. Harrison held up one hand. Tab 2 contains forensic accounting documenting a 3-year embezzlement scheme from Aldridge Precision's operational accounts, totaling $4.2 million attributable to Owen Marsh. That documentation has been submitted to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and the Ohio AG. Tab 3 contains the independent medical assessment and pharmacy dispensing records documenting the intentional over-medication of Victor Aldridge, beginning in early 2023. He closed the portfolio. Copies of the federal referrals are in Tab 4. The room was absolutely silent. Owen had stopped moving. Claudette sat down, not the way people sit when they choose to, but the way they sit when the choice is made for them. "You can't," she started. "The hotels are in foreclosure," Fiona said. "The embezzlement documentation is with federal investigators. The medical records are with the AG, and I've been told the DA is reviewing them for criminal charges." She looked at Claudette directly with no heat in her face, only that settled clarity she had found in a concrete room in Akron staring at a dark screen. "You don't have the company, you don't have the hotels. The accounts are frozen pending the FBI review." Claudette's mouth opened, closed. Her hands, flat on the table, had begun to shake. Fiona reached into her blazer pocket and withdrew the old pocket watch. She set it down on the conference table in front of Claudette, cracked crystal face up, hands frozen at 4:17. "He gave me this," she said quietly. "You looked at it and saw a joke. He looked at it and saw the only thing he trusted me to protect." She straightened. "You're going to need a criminal defense attorney, Claudette. I'd start that conversation before end of business today." She left the watch where it was. Some things don't need to be carried anymore once they've done their work. She picked up her bag and walked out. The elevator opened onto the lobby. Her father's building, managed now under a company that bore her name. Through the glass front, Columbus was grey and cold, and entirely ordinary in the way that cities are when something enormous has just finished happening inside one of their buildings. She had a manufacturing company to learn, 4 hotel properties to evaluate, a charitable trust to build, and several thousand employees whose pension stability was going to be her first phone call Monday morning. She had given herself until Thursday to be back in her classroom in Dayton. Because 22 fourth graders had a substitute who didn't know that Marcus hated being called on without warning, or that Priya needed extra time on anything timed. And some things you don't walk away from, just because your life has rearranged itself around you. Her father had spent 9 years building her a foundation in secret. She had spent those same 9 years building herself one out in the open. Between the two of them, she figured they had probably built something that would hold. So, what would you have done? If someone handed you something broken, something worthless, something that made a room full of people smirk behind their hands, would you leave it on the table, drop it in the parking garage and walk away clean? Or would you carry it for 2 hours to Akron, Ohio, and press your thumbnail against the back of it in a concrete room until something clicked? Fiona carried it, and it turned out her father had been right about her all along. If this story moved you, hit that like button and send it to someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to keep the drama. New stories drop every week, and none of them end the way you think they will. Drop a comment below. What would you have done with that watch?